I am joined by Alexander Juan Antonio Cortez. You guys can find him on Twitter at AJA_Cortez, CORTES. Alexander, I've been following you for a while. This is the first time we talked, but you guys got to be following this guy on Twitter. Sign up for his email list because there's a lot of, let's say, like a very meta 30,000 foot view of what's going on holistically from a science, nutrition, non-bullshit, straight talk, how to optimize yourself from a fitness personal training standpoint. You're also a writer for Ironman magazine, one of the new fitness authors on Danger and Play media website. Thanks for coming, man.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's good to talk.
Yeah. So you just made a trek out to California. You've been back and forth a bit. What's been going on?
Yeah. So a brief bio. So I've been a personal trainer since 2009. This is the only training and exercise is only, I should say health is the only field I've ever worked in. Past year I was in Florida. So I was there helping to grow a gym business, Relentless Performance. We were a high-end, I guess you'd say sort of like not a luxury gym, but just like a high-end private training facility. I was there from November of 2015 to November of 2016. That business grew pretty substantially. So I was training, 30 plus appointments a week, train the staff to, level up their training expertise, their service. And then finishing that up, I decided to come back to California since I'm working with our mutual friend, Jay Campbell, writing for Mike Stern's website. And then the proliferation of just the sheer volume of writing work has become enough where I decided to go all in on that, since you can connect with people online than you can, physically. So
they're definitely great guys. I noticed you were on the, I know this is a total aside. Are you when you did the daily email thing, you were on the Ben Settle thing. How have you been employing a lot of his strategies? He's really an amazing, copywriter kind of guy. I don't want to get off on that tangent, but
oh no, not at all.
I can't recommend his stuff enough to people.
Yeah, no, but Ben Settle, I encountered his stuff recently, and copywriting is something I realized that for someone like myself, where I can be generic and say I started as a trainer because I want to help people. Like that's always the thing. Like even yourself, you're a physician. I'm a doctor. I want to help people. Yeah, at a certain standpoint, you have to think broader beyond like how are you really affecting people, within the overall confined capacity of their life. And if you really want to make an impact on society, you have to affect more people than just the people you can see in person.
Mm-hmm.
Not that interaction doesn't matter or it's unimportant, but everyone is always time domain limited. There's only 24 hours in a day. There's only maybe 16, 12, 8 hours a day that you can truly work with somebody. So the copywriting stuff, like with Ben, I realized if I really want to, grow an email list or make myself accessible to the public at large, I have to know how to speak, online. I have to know how to write. I have to know how to create content that is compelling for people to open up the email or, open up the book and read it and want to learn more, tell the story. But his tactic of just, quite literally just emailing 3 times a day or, emailing, more than once a day or emailing a lot.
He's a genius, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been incredible. Actually, just from like a marketing standpoint, like my email list started out with 200 people, like the beginning of this year, 2016, and then I didn't really start doing anything with it until October, and the list is at 1,200 people right now. So it's gone up, 600% in 3 months.
Yeah, it's fascinating watching kind of the confluence of that. Seeing it firsthand in the inbox and then the personal training aspect of it, it's neat to see how these things kind of amalgamate together. But enough about El Bemba over there. So I want to talk about, so let's just get right into it about the nonsense that's being perpetuated. A lot of it's, marketing. A lot of it is, the powers that be that are, in the supplement industry, the fitness industry.
Mm-hmm.
What are the 3 things you see right now that people, huge mistakes they're making, or things that they can do that just completely revolutionize how their workouts are and how they can optimize themselves?
The 3, if I was to assign 3 major mistakes with health as a whole, the first one is just a lack of lifestyle consideration to the advice you receive with training or nutrition. And this applies to everything. This could be, someone thinking about they want to do CrossFit and paleo, or they want to try keto dieting and then they're going to do some sort of HIIT training protocol along with that. But, for anyone where you're talking about optimizing your health, optimizing your physical fitness, your internal health, what is your lifestyle right now? I mean, that just involves, what is your sleep pattern? What is your job? What is your work? What are your priorities and responsibilities?
Mhm.
You have to take that into consideration before you go to do anything, since there's a lot of things that can work, but they also can be highly incongruent with your need state right now. And that's something that people do not consider, or they're just not aware of. And I mean, you can take something like, you can take even absurd stuff like, the HCG diet, where, that works. You're not going to argue that doesn't work if you're only eating 500 calories a day. At the same time, you have to, again, people just don't think about this. They don't take into consideration, am I going to be able to make that last, past 6 weeks? Yeah, but not even getting into like the health ramifications, but does that seem reasonable to you to be able to continue with that? Same thing with training programs. Again, there's a huge medley of things that are available in the world. Is it appropriate for you to do right now? Without knowing someone's level, of fitness, of, level of health, I can't make a recommendation, be arbitrary. I can say that if you don't ask yourself those questions, you're probably going to screw yourself up.
So a very foundational layer needs to be set before they can just dive in and kind of ad hoc everything. So, it's interesting. I see some of these questions that, these Q&As and people are, it's sometimes kind of scary how much has to be, and also from a medical standpoint, how much nonsense is floating out there that you have to wade through to get to the core of really how simple these things are.
Yeah.
How did you get down into this space initially?
I started off, when I started as an office trainer, I was working in Silicon Valley. A lot of my clients worked in the tech industry.
Okay.
So a lot of guys that were just, very weirdly brilliant dudes, could program, could code, very organizational, but also hugely neglectful of their health to an extreme degree. This lack of sleep, lack of nutrition, kind of this lack of everything. They're very driven by their job. And it made me realize a lot of like the stuff I was reading in regards to health. I was in like a hardcore streak at the time. I was reading like a lot of these Iron Game authors, a lot of powerlifting content. A lot of it wasn't necessarily relevant to these dudes. And then the same thing later on as I started to work with, people that were, let's say moms, or, people that were just general population. There's a very big disconnect between what a health enthusiast, fitness enthusiast does versus what a general population person needs. And, ironically, I ended up working with high-level bodybuilders for the last 3 years when I started working with John Meadows, who he's he's bodybuilder, IFBB professional, has a Mountain Dog diet business, has a huge client list. So then, I went from working with sort of general population, working with high-level bodybuilders. That's a whole different level of guys. Those are guys where you can make the recommendations. You want to try this supplement, try this training program, nutrient timing. You can really play around with food source. You can play around with the arrangement of how you structure your lifestyle, and they'll do it. And obviously you can achieve, very extreme effects. And there's cool stuff that comes out of that you can use with general population, definitely. But at the same time, how those guys live their life and how an average person lives their life, huge difference. And it was kind of at that point where I realized with writing and then, trying to help people, or, trying to reach an audience, I realized you have to put this stuff in context. You can potentially speak to everybody and have something to offer, but you have to give mind to the fact of what is your actual position for yourself. If no one brings up that question ever, there's always going to be confusion with health information, just flat out.
So what is the dissonance that you see, what is it specifically that people want that it's not aligning as far as from a general population standpoint?
I wouldn't consider a question of want so much as need, but just a lack of awareness. I would attribute to the fact that with society at large, we have the most information ever that's available. Everything's been democratized, but with the general shift towards this both obesity, lack of physical activity, lack of physical education in school, lack of, let's just say, athletic participation from a young age. You now have a generation of people for the last 30 years where they didn't play a sport, they never worked out, they never really understood anything about this basic eating nutrition, and they got fat. And that's now about 60-70% of the population. And they have a complete lack of this connectivity to the idea that they're lifestyle affects their health in a dramatic way. They usually don't realize it until they hit a crisis point. So yeah, you have the percentage of population that they're really into their health, but at any given time, they're only about 15 to 20% of people. Everybody else occupies sort of like a 20-20-20 mid zone of lack of awareness to some awareness to, maybe confused, but trying to change things. And then from there, everyone needs something a little bit different. So you can either hit people to the fact they don't know really anything,
Mhm.
or you can take a desire to learn and they know something and then start building on that.
So I'm sorry, this gap of nutritional and this lack of cognizance in this space, what do you attribute it to as far as from like the general population at large? Is it laziness? Is it just indoctrination from the media? Where is this disconnect happening?
Yeah, I would say probably honestly like indoctrination with media, and just like I don't want to say like blame the government, but it is governmental social in the sensibility that the U.S. government, after the military standards got lowered during the 1970s for the Vietnam War. I could go off a whole tangent about that, but
No, that's
yeah, no, I mean military. So McNamara made a decision to lower standards, secondary defense. He lowered standards during the Vietnam War to get more guys able to be drafted. That had I would say, a far-reaching impact on the overall psychological health of who was able to go into the military from that point onward. At the same time, even going back to the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, one of the unfortunate things that happened with World War II, and this is going to sound wild, but at the beginning of the 19th century, I'm not advocating for eugenics, but at the beginning of the 19th century, you had a population and you had governments that were very nationalist.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of social policy that's centered around the physical health of the population. So 1900s, 1910s, that was a thing that existed. Obviously, you had World War I. That eliminated a lot of, sort of the healthy male population in a lot of countries. Then you have this revitalization of, nationalism in the 1920s, 1930s. With Nazism and obviously the rise of eugenics and using that as a social cleansing system, there was a very major political shift in governments being very direct in wanting to sort of control and conduct their population's physical, health, to a hands-off policy of, that's very in alignment with what, the Nazi Party was doing. We're going to take a step back from doing that. So over a period of, let's just say 60 years from the, sort of the, post-World War II onward, governments as a whole just stopped implementing, certain social policies in regards to health. And you could say obviously P is one of them. That is, one of them. But a lot of it was also the fact of just like a lack of, food education, a lack of nutritional education, a lack of, social education, at the adolescent level. And, going to education, in the 1960s, a lot of that stuff started getting cut. And then, by the 80s, you had this reduction where people realized, there's this big divide between now physical health and physical education, but, nothing was ever really done of it. And so now we're at a point now 70 years later where now it's a crisis. Now, there's no more PE in schools, but it started, quite literally, at this point it was 100 years ago. So it was this big social trend from physical culture at the beginning of the 19th century, or the beginning of the 20th century, physical culture that came to rise from 1900, 1920, and then took a big downward slope, to 2000, let's say 2010. And now at this stage, maybe we're at a point where it's going to make another rise back up. But
so the pendulum, we're just in the wrong arc of the pendulum right now, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a book, it's called the testosterone hypothesis, I believe it is. So
Yes.
How much of a play do you think that has in, where we're at right now, and how much the differentiation in testosterone levels and hormone levels affects these kinds of general population, not just political events, but, even our acclimation to want to get towards wars or have different types of conflicts abroad?
Yeah, no, it affects social norms. I mean, the thing that people don't consider with testosterone or with sex hormones, I talk about this constantly, is that it affects cognitive function. It does. I mean, there's a reason, if someone is gender transitioning from, female to male, what do? They give them testosterone shots. It results in a personality change. I mean, the science behind that's very unequivocal. Testosterone affects cognitive function. I know Roy, like I had him on a podcast like 2 years ago. I've read and reread the book, but with the testosterone hypothesis, when you look at social testosterone levels, societal testosterone levels, or just let's just say societal hormone levels, that is heavily influenced by solar radiation. Yeah, I mean, most people. So the IOC, the international governing body that governs sports athletics, tanning is actually banned as a performance enhancer.
Wow.
Yeah, most people don't. Yeah, it was banned in the 1970s because I want to say it was like it was the East German swim team. They would bring tanning beds to swim meets, and they'd have the athletes tan in the bed about an hour before they had to go, swim. And there was a performance enhancing effect. And part of the effect was the release of testosterone and adrenaline. So, and there's a lot of evidence that goes into that, but testosterone, solar radiation, it affects testosterone levels. It does. When you have an entire population of people, there is now in the hundreds of millions, and they are essentially all estrogen dominant, and they have been now for, let's say 10, 20, 30 years, society is at a point where I said this morning, society is basically a whole bunch of women on their period. And that is now who does the critical reasoning. So you have critical reasoning and objective thinking being done by hormonal women who are in the midst of their cycle. And I mean, I'm using that as a metaphor, but that's going to contribute to your rationality in policy decisions. It's going to contribute to your rationality in political decisions. That's going to contribute to conflict. I mean, this is going to sound, this could sound anti-women, but what happens when women are super emotional? What happens when we're hyper emotional, on their period? They're combative, they're moody, and they argue and they don't get along with anybody. What has happened in the last year with the rise of nationalism? Countries are combative. They don't want separatism is on the rise, and nobody wants to get along with each other. We want to get along, but away from you.
Yeah, there is a pervasive just demasculinization of whatever's going on in society. It's funny you mentioned. I remember hearing not too long ago that they were trying to ban beet juice because it would increase for the Rio Olympics or the one before that, because the nitric oxide would increase so heavily that it would actually be considered a performance enhancer. I'm not sure if they actually went through with it, but we had a guy on, a physician. His name is escaping me right now, but he's from the UK, and he did a lot of research on Dr. Richard Weller, from the University of Edinburgh, I believe, and he was saying that the whole thing with vitamin D and the sun is that it's not so much as taking the supplements, but the vitamin D affecting the nitric oxide in the deep layers of your dermal layer, your deep dermal layers. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's going to have some, effect on testosterone. I mean, I think we're just scratching the surface of how important the sun really is, and I'm sure it's almost an anabolic steroid at some level.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you could say someone could say, well, that sounds crazy, but you have to consider the fact that, simple evolutionary fact that human beings have evolved with a solar cycle. There's a reason that we fall. I said this in an email. There's a reason that we fall asleep at night. There's a reason that the brain goes into this deep sleep and all these things reset and all these processes take place. We know full out that the sun affects our health, and that the lack of sun affects our health. That's obvious. Seasonal affective disorder, it's been around a while. Like, people get weird when they're not exposed to sunlight. You could dramatically fuck up somebody's sleep by putting them in the sun 24/7 with no night cycle. So, to taking that by extension, the idea that the sun would affect sex hormones, that seems pretty reasonable to me.
Well, I think you mentioned this in a recent email, was about, the relation between these hormones and depression. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people that, they get on testosterone, they're off their depression medication, SSRI. So it's very interesting how far off we've become from the intrinsic cycle that we're supposed to be on, whether it's through, the global capitalism or whatever that we're being poisoned with.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, like, physical culture, I was reading a book recently, Eugene Sandow's from 1920. He talks about, it's hysterical because he talks about processed food. He talks about the dangers of processed food. He talks about the dangers of an inactive society. And then he proposes like this sort of World Health Council, sort of like this United Nations of Health that's going to get the population healthier. And this is 1920. Yes, I mean, it's not a new idea. Obviously that didn't end up happening, but there was recognition even then that the industrialization of society and the overall complacency and the lack of physical activity, it was having negative effects on health overall. There's a condition back in the 1920s, and I want to say it was a sort of a pseudo neurological condition, kind of similar to like fibromyalgia today. They made up bullshit, but it was called like neuronesia, and it just referred to like this general 150 different symptoms of muscle weakness and pain and unexplainable pain and tiredness and I can't think straight and my bones hurt. And he considered this condition to be a symptom of a lack of physical activity, and a lack of physical robustness. And it was hysterical reading it because I'm reading this passage in the book, and it sounds like fibromyalgia today. The exact same thing, the exact same list of symptoms, and the majority of the people that have it are women. And it was his belief that it was from like I said, lack of exercise and a lack of proper nutrition. And then the result was that it made you, mentally irritable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're driving home a good point right now where this connection between the physical realm and the mental plane, and I know you're big on mindset, and a couple other people we follow are big into this space. So what are some things that you personally do to attune yourself mentally, and how does that establish itself in the physical realm?
Mental attunement wise, there was so I mean I'll back up a little bit. I will say, so the idea of mind body dualism, where you have the body, you have the mind, and the mind controls the body. I got away from that a long time ago. One thing was my background is that my background is really, I was a dancer. So I'm a ballet dancer. My background is in dance and dance arts and dance choreography. What you learn in that discipline is that the physical expression of the body is essentially just an expression of mental state. So in regards to physical attunement, my belief was, my personal belief, and someone could practice this as well, is that your physical self, your physical representation of yourself should be the physical representation of your mind and how you think. Now, obviously, you cannot put all of your thoughts into just your looks, but the body is going to be the thing that expresses, your actions, your feelings, your emotions. So in terms of attenuation, I've become very reliant upon the gut instinct. I think that's something that, yes, you can't quantify it, but it does have a very inherent connection to your mental state. But going by gut instinct and then learning over time with physical training, to be very mentally, internally focused with what you're doing, that keeps me mentally present in regards to just, situations in general. At the same time, it makes me much more attentive to my own biofeedback with my health. So, the stuff generally, soreness, lethargy, aches, pains, digestion, and what have you. Those are things that I know to notice and pay attention to versus just ignoring, or thinking that I'm just mentally, I'm going to get over it, or I'm not going to worry about it.
So how do you embody yourself mentally to be showcased physically, personally? How do you hope for yourself to be represented?
Okay. All right, now. In terms of physical training, embodiment, that comes down to physical image. This is something that it's a question that someone needs to ask themselves as to what kind of human being, man, woman, do you want to represent and turn into? So when I was younger, I'm talking 5, 6 years old, I was very impressed, like most guys are, with, I hope, no testosterone levels. I was very impressed by the concept of heroes. I was very impressed by the concept of embodying a masculine ideal. Mm-hmm. As I aged, I knew I wanted to train myself and, not just follow those things, follow those virtues, but look like I followed them. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to have that look of a hero. And then over time, that's what all of my training was centered upon. So, that involves certain things. That involves, obviously, physical health, physical strength. That involves cardiovascular health. That involves, having, the energy system to support that. That involves having the mental health, to sustain that, way of living. And collectively, going back to, I was probably 12, 13, 14 when I first started lifting, I always kept that as the mental precept that was sort of leading me. And obviously that doesn't have an end point to it that once I get to X level with my physique, I'm going to stop. But I knew that over the course of my life to the day I die, if I want to uphold, my personal values, I need to have that physical body that can do that and be able to make that impression upon people.
So, I mean, there's definitely some, I mean, there's definitely got to be a mindset connection. I mean, people that tell themselves repeatedly, I can't work out, I don't have the energy. They're obviously the ones that don't make healthy lifestyle choices. So, I mean, as far as just day to day, what is going on? What do you do, specifically? And tell us a little more about this minimalist training program philosophy that you have.
Yeah, day to day physically, I keep things simple. I wake up. I wake up in the morning. I'll always meditate for 10 minutes in the morning. You could call this transcendental meditation, but it's just something where I'll go through a mental run through of what my day is, where my current sort of position of life is, and then just a general release of just stressors, non-stressors, positive sources of stress. Just sort of, you could say, sort of center myself in mental space. That always happens in the morning. From there, the routine is fairly typical. It's just coffee, read, write, newspaper, maybe catch a bunch of current events. I'll write for about 3 hours in the morning. I'll go typically train. I'll write for another 3 to 4 hours in the evening. In regards to minimalist training, I would say it's not minimalism in the sense of just do as little as you possibly can, but rather do what is effective. So when you're talking about, optimizing lifestyle, optimizing health, my term I always use is effectivity. So with training, is your training effectivized? So I could call it effectivized training, but that wouldn't be as catchy. But with, the minimalist training principles, I practice, I'm just looking at, what is most effective, at what dosage, at what duration, and then, how many times you need to repeat that. For a lot of people with their training, they can, whether they're high level or low level, they can do a lot of junk volume where they just the time with how they work out. And, that might be for a psychological reason where they love to train a lot. But if you're really interested in taking your health to the next level, whether you're at 0, whether you're at 100, you have to ask yourself, you have to filter everything through an effectivity filter. Is this actually yielding something, or am I doing it just because I like to do it? If it's purely psychological, sure. But if you want something to truly have an effect, you have to be more objective with it.
What is this effectivity filter for you specifically? Is it just purely results, or is this based on the things that the people want to look at, to start off with, that foundational layer? I mean, what is your specific effectivity layer? Yeah. A lot of trial and error that you've done with a lot of these trainings, or?
Yeah, the effectivity filter, I mean, I could place a couple things. On an exercise basis, there's 2 factors. What do you want to get out of this exercise? I mean, this could be something as simple as, let's say an advanced guy where I want to have bigger shoulders, and that's a lagging body part for him. Okay. So applying the filter then, what has your training consisted of? When was the last time you made progress? And then based on your own anthropometrics, which that's an assessment that I have to do in person, you have to really see how someone's structurally built. What is going to be effective movement-wise for you? It may be something that you've done in the past that you didn't quite, realize. It may be something new. But if I'm going to, improve this muscle group, this is, speaking bodybuilding, I want to do the movements that I know are going to stimulate growth. And that's based upon your training experience, your training history, mind-muscle connection, and then, obviously what I can do for you right now. So, that's one way to employ it. On another level, you could apply it to diet. If I'm talking about improving somebody's body composition, what's going to yield the biggest effect? In some cases with guys that I had that were very advanced, like, with nutrient timing, we were at a level where the only way to make things work better was to use, exogenous, chemicals, or exogenous hormones. Like that, you're at that level where, all right, we're going to take these things, we're going to time it out in this fashion. We're going to use growth hormone and insulin, and, we're going to couple it with, very fast digesting, low, osmosis carbs. We're going to do that, because, that's the point that you're at. And that's going to be effective because we've exhausted all other things. On a different level, for someone that's just starting out with their nutrition, trying to effectivize it, it could be something as simple as just this fluid intake, this hydration. That in itself could have broad-reaching effects. So you're looking both at what the person's need state is, what they've done, it's on a continuum, and then what they might be missing.
I know it's a super simple concept, but just how imperative is water for people listening to incorporate in their lives?
You know, it's very, I mean, the one thing with water, I mean, it's 80% of the body. That's, I mean, shit, I just read it was like a shorty study. It was something like, cognitive impairment can, I don't know how they measure this, but it was like 30 to 40% if you're dehydrated.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, it was statistically significant, and it was just from a lack of water intake. I mean, I've seen that. I've seen it in the highest level of athletes, people that are literally at like the Olympic competitive, almost world record level. They don't drink enough water, and I mean, that's something that, you're training, you have a muscle strain, you tear something, you have an injury, ACL tear, what have you. Your whole body, everything's connected, but I mean, fluid intake, like all of you, I mean, your whole vestibular system, if you're dehydrated, that gets completely fucked up.
Yeah.
You can have a fuck up with balance, with, with joint functionality, with muscle firing. You get injured, guess what? You're out competing now for the next year and a half. I mean, and that literally could have been solved by, the gallon jug could have fucking solved that.
Yeah. It is. I've been playing around with alkalized water recently, and there's a noticeable effect as far as just bringing down the pH. I mean, I would say the biggest issue, other than, hormone optimization issues in the environment, inflammation being, ever present, and it almost seems malicious at this point, is that there's an ever present acidity that's being pushed into people, whether it's through this inflammation, through sugar, through the environment.
Yes.
And people have to bring, that's what these cancers and diseases are. So it's an elevated, it's an acidic state. We really bring it down when you look at it. And there's no better solvent to reorient your body from an acidic state to a more alkaline state than water.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's something that, the metabolic theory of cancer. I mean, like I was reading that book recently, so that's sort of come back. That's kind of made a comeback now, but your body does have an acid-base balance, and yeah, you can, I mean, that's always like the popular, that's always like the fitness pro thing that drives me fucking crazy. Like acid alkaline, it's all bullshit. It doesn't matter. I'm like, of course it fucking matters. Okay. Yeah. I mean, geez, if I hold your head underwater for fucking, 20 minutes, you're going to be dead. That has oxygen in it, but who cares? I mean, God, it's this very both dogmatic and short-sighted binary way of thinking. But yeah, I mean, that's well known in cancer research. I had a client that was a physician where he did cancer research in the early 1990s, and it was cancer research in patients they had cancer and they're going through surgery. And they found, he told me, he's like, the research we did all these interventionist therapies. We found that people, that if we could get their overall, body to a more alkalized state and lower cortisol, they would recover better from the, both the treatment and their, recovery rate from the cancer. The rate of remission would go way down. I'm like, and he obviously, we're not going to say, well, there's a client, Matthew, I can't remember the guy's last name, but he was saying about that research that he did for like 10 years. I'm like, he was a very big proponent of alkalized water, or just, the idea that your body has the acid-base balance in general, where he's like, modern diet, like you said, we have processed food, we have sugar, we have very high carbon intake for a lot of people, very low protein intake. Then you add in the factor that most people don't detox, they don't exercise, they do nothing that induces autophagy or purification. You're going to end up in this perfect disease. You're going to end up in this perfect environment for disease to take root, and it's all caused by lifestyle fundamentally. So, having said that, I remember you were doing this for the listeners, this McShredded, the McDonald's diet thing. So, what are some things? I mean, can you take us through that as far as like all the dispelling all the nonsense with like macros, micros, empty calories, all this basically bullshit out there, and how hashtag McShredded, was born? Yeah, so that's a good question. So I had a whole bunch of people that were up and on. It's like, how could you say all that and then fucking promote McDonald's? I'm like, that wasn't the point of promoting McDonald's. With working with dietary clientele, where you have people that, like I said, their lifestyles are just absolute dog shit. Everybody always obsesses, and perhaps in a way rightly so, over, okay, well, macros, micronutrients, what should I be eating, not eating? Fundamentally, their overall eating behaviors are fucked sideways. So the average person cannot even feed themselves normally on, on a continuum. They cannot even eat consistently. the first, principle, or really the first priority to getting someone to stabilize, their health is, can you just feed yourself normally? Can we establish a dietary baseline where you eat, let's just say the same-ish things at the same times of day? Yeah, if nothing else, just doing that. And, the group I was working with in dietetics, we saw through blood work and feedback that could have very profound effects on health. It can. Just having someone eat at caloric maintenance, getting in enough protein, enough carbohydrates, enough fat, and eating at regular times, blood work would improve, overall energy would improve, alertness would improve, and just the other factors around their lifestyle would get better. So we came up with the sort of the McShred hashtag as this service, joke on where, if you can just stabilize your lifestyle, then yeah, you could go have McDonald's and it's not going to freaking destroy you. And obviously, it caused a lot of controversy, and obviously it got convoluted into, well, we want people to go eat McDonald's. I'm like, I don't want anyone to go eat McDonald's. Ideally, that you'd be healthy enough where McDonald's is not your, food of choice every day to go feed yourself. Yeah. That said, however, if your lifestyle's in order, it's not going to kill you because you've taken care of these other priorities. If your life's a shit show, then yeah, it probably is going to kill you. But as I always say, everything is your fault.
So, I mean, McDonald's will not tip you over the scales if it's like an adjunct to a consistent regimen as far as diet. So, I mean, what's your day-to-day diet, consistent? What are some rules that you try to adhere to in regards to consistency, specific types of foods, things like that, things to look for when people go shopping?
Yeah. So day-to-day diet. So I'm a proponent of, you need to modulate your energy intake with your energy, output. On a typical day, I'll generally have about 180 to 220 grams of protein. And that's just based around my body weight being about, roughly 200 approximately. Fat intake, I'll go as low, I've gone as low as 20 if I'm really dieting, but generally speaking, it's around 50 to 80. It's a combination of unsaturated fats and healthy saturated fats. Red meat, generally organic, when I'm in a position to. Avocados, some legumes. That's about it. And then, let's say extra virgin olive oil, coconut oil. For carbohydrates, again, I keep it simple, but rice, wild rice, red rice, brown rice. I'll have bread occasionally. I'm not really a sandwich guy, but I'll have bread. It's, every once in a while. And then from there, maybe like oatmeal, the oatmeal, maybe, sometimes post-training, sometimes in the morning. If I'm highly active, where, let's say in the past few months, I was training 4 days a week with ballet for performance. I was lifting another 4 days, lower volume, but to help maintain muscle mass. And then I was training like a full 10-hour day of clients. My calorie intake was, was higher. It was in let's say around, 3,600. If I'm inactive, I'll eat more at like a basal metabolic level, kind of under eating, but I know that I'll go through periods where I'll want sort of autophagy to happen to keep myself healthy. And then my calorie intake at that level will be around maybe 2,300.
Mm-hmm. So as far as, you mentioned real briefly on oatmeal. So let's dispel real quickly as far as the window for carbohydrates. Is this something you do either just, an intermittent fasting window? Is this 30 to 60 minutes before and after workouts? What is something that can be optimally done and reasonable?
Yeah. So optimally, so if I'm not that active and I'm, like right now, like I'm writing a lot, trying to get, like these books done. So if I'm not that active, I'll have my carbs pre and intra workout. I won't have anything post.
Why is that?
Yeah, and that's just how I choose to do it, just because I know everything is going to get metabolized. My insulin sensitivity is going to be, it's going to be low. And, for myself, that fuels my training really effectively. So I can have, let's just say, maybe 100, like 100 grams pre-training, which, that's a substantial amount. Then I'll have 50 grams, during training, and then none afterwards. And that could be lower. It could be like 50 before, 50 during. It could be, if it's really low, maybe it's just before training. I've done that, where I'll front load the carbs, like 80 grams before I go to train, in that way. But I always know in that case that, like I said, insulin sensitivity is going to be awesome. My fasting glucose is going to be awesome. All the carbs are going to get metabolized really well. And then, doing that in itself, I'll also, raise my fat intake a little bit along with my protein intake. So, my satiety stays pretty high with all my meals. I don't get hungry that way.
Where's your meal in this? Is it like 1.5 to 3 hours before the workout, or does it really matter at this point?
About 1.5 hours. You know, like, I mean, sometimes it'll be 3 hours before. I'm not a proponent of nutrient timing in the sense that it's gonna, you know, make or break you, so to speak, but it does matter in regards to managing your energy levels. So I'll have breakfast in the morning, I'll have a meal before I train, I'll have a meal after I train, I'll have a meal in the evening. I'll usually have like a shake in between. So it comes out to about 5 meals a day. And yeah, my major thing with that is not necessarily even like the muscle building aspects of it. It's just the fact that my energy just stays, you know, I wake up, I'm energetic, and it doesn't drop off until maybe the very, very end of the day when I'm about to go to sleep.
So you're a midday kind of workout guy.
Yeah.
You found that just works best with your internal rhythm or just your schedule?
Yeah, that works well. My own biorhythm, like that works extremely well. That is something I would, you know, encourage people to test out. Generally speaking, I think the people that like to work out late at night, they just have very erratic sleep schedules. So they may be that person where they get the really good nighttime workout. But, you know, relative to your body's, you know, natural, you know, circadian rhythm, you're going to be at your highest energy within the first 6 hours of the day, and there's going to be a taper down from that. So if you can train somewhere within that, you know, roughly 6 hour window, that's going to be pretty optimal.
So are you a proponent of someone, you know, just listening to their body and knowing when to have periods of downtime and kind of restructuring, or consistently, you know, 5-6 times a week in the gym minimum?
Yeah, that depends. I would say I'll devise a rule for this. When you first start training, take the minimum dose. So let's just say 3 days a week of exercise is my broad recommendation. Over time, start increasing your training volume if you're able to 4 days, 5 days, 6 days. I would encourage everybody at some point in their life to try to train every day, even if it's only for a few months, simply for the fact that it will teach you a lot about your own biofeedback and what your body responds to. So what you see with advanced training is, like, I have clients that are in their 40s, 50s, their training volume is very biofeedback driven at this point. You know, how am I feeling today? How do my joints feel? They do a physical check down. I'll take, you know, I even have a list of things that I'll have people go through, you know, like, you know, on their off days, like, assess, like, okay, what needs to be worked on? Do we need soft tissue work? Is everything good? Do we just need to, you know, go through some stretching, what have you? But they've arrived at that point over 25 years. Mm-hmm. For someone that's in their 20s and 30s, take advantage of your, you know, overall metabolic hormonal health in that time and try to push your body to as high or an exercise volume as it reasonably can handle. Don't destroy yourself and overtrain for a year, but your metabolic capacity in regards to, you know, your input, your output, as you age, it's going to be highly influenced by the muscle and training capacity you build in your 20s and 30s. So if you can get that to a very, you know, high level, so to speak, maybe not world class, but if you can get to a very high level of muscularity, a very high level of cardiovascular efficiency, you know, both central and peripheral, that's only going to help you age into your 40s, 50s, 60s. So, you know, in that sense, yeah, the minimum dose it's good to start off with in the beginning, but take that as high as you can. And then at that point, you can make a reasonable estimation of, do I taper this back down? Do I sustain this? Do I adjust this? Do I lengthen it out? You know, and that will create that training continuum over time for you.
So, what's your take on devices like, you know, just biofeedback devices, heart rate monitors? I mean, is that something people can employ? Is there any worthwhile aspect to it?
They can be useful. Emphasis on can. I've used heart rate variability monitors. You know, like the BioForce system. I've used that. I've used the Omega waves at times. There are those things where they're pretty interesting, and I would say at like a high athletic level, you know, for let's say like elite athletes in money sports, they could have a role. At the same time, for the average person, it will give you some useful information, but the reality is that you can internalize most of those systems yourself. Mm. So something like heart rate variability, yeah, you can get the chest monitor and you can track the data and you can see, like, oh wow, like, you know, on the days I train really hard, my heart rate's elevated the next morning. On the weeks where I took a lot of time off, my heart rate actually dropped in the morning. I know I'm fully recovered. That's cool. At the same time, though, that's something that you can assess yourself. You don't necessarily need a device. So, I mean, I'd equate it almost like the Fitbit in that sense, where it can be useful in, you know, for people where they realize, like, wow, I barely walk. I need to walk more. Or wow, you know, my my exercising didn't burn as many calories as I thought it did. Okay, I need to be more aware of that. But once you get that, that quantitative awareness down and that realization, you don't need to keep using it. So it informs your health, but I would say it guides it per se.
So you're writing a book right now. What's your second book? You're saying, what's the hardest part about, writing? How'd you get into the state? And what are 2 or 3 books that have had the greatest impact on you?
Yeah, the hardest part of writing is getting out of your own way doing it. I don't believe in writer's block at all. I think that's just kind of like a bullshit. I think it's a bullshit. I'm an artist and I have feelings and this is hard kind of excuse. If you are living life and you have something to say, you should have something to write about. Now, if you're a perfectionist and you want everything to be good and perfect, yeah, I can see writing would be hard. I can say from a dancing perspective, artists, especially performing artists or even writers, are fucking infamous for being screwed up, emotionally rot, damaged people, and they get into bad relationships and they purposefully lead self-destructive lifestyles because it gives them something to talk about. So if that's how it's going to be, that's how it's going to be. But relative to the field I work in, there's no shortage of health stuff I can write about on any given day. So I made the commitment, a few months ago, I'm going to write every day. I'm going to write at least 2,000 words, and that's what's going to happen. And I know full well that not everything I write is good. I'm not expecting every email I send out, oh, this is another masterpiece of an email. This is going to be hard hitting. Some of the stuff's very generic. Some of the stuff is, hey, here's an article I read. Here's kind of my take on it. This could be very relevant information. Hopefully you get something out of it. But over time, let's just say, my baseline, as I always go after the baseline concept, it starts off as, good, suck, good, mediocre, suck. Over time, it elevates to mediocre, good, and then it gets into good, great. So over the course of a few years, I expect the writing quality to improve. As of right now, is it good enough that it's going to educate somebody? Yes. I know full well that every email I send out, I look at the numbers, and I know the quality of my work. At least 5 or 6 people, maybe 10 people are going to get something valuable from that.
Yeah.
Good enough. If over time that gets to 500, it gets to 50, 500,000, awesome. But it has to start somewhere.
Yeah. I like that binary system of good, suck for a bit, and then having different gradations of getting out of that. What were some books that had the greatest impact on you, or just personal favorites?
Oh, say that again?
What are 2 or 3 books that have had the greatest impact on you, or favorite?
The book question. I always go off on tangents. There's relative to like health fitness. There's one that I've recommended over and over again it's a really good book. It's called The Purposeful Primitive by Marty Gallagher. Marty Gallagher, he's a very old school powerlifter. He's been lifting for 60 years. He was, I would say, the first guy that got me realizing back in 2009 that you could talk about mental health, you could talk about lifestyle, you could tell stories, and you could still make it about fitness. So The Purposeful Primitive, it's kind of like a historical anthology of weightlifting from like the 1950s up until today. And some of it's just workout routines, which are very effective. There's programs from the book I've used over and over again over the years with clients, with myself. They work. So, if nothing else, it's an awesome workout book. At the same time, it's interspersed with his observations on nutritional health, the role of clinical health in medicine, the role of, the difference between Eastern and Western philosophy with, physical performance, stuff like visualization, cybernetics, people he studied with that, taught him, there's various lessons about, let's say how to perform at a high level or relaxation or stress management. So it's pretty eclectic in that sense. And it's interesting, throughout, even if you don't like all of it, there's something where I could guarantee you'll pick up a different perspective or just some useful information of stuff that I didn't know about health at the time or training at the time that I learned after reading it. It's about, maybe about 330 pages. It's a pretty big book, but Purposeful Primitive, that's definitely one. In terms of this like sheer writing style, I'm a Hemingway guy. Yeah, I remember reading The Old Man, the Sea. It's a really tragic, really freaking sad book with a great lesson about life, and you can read it in an hour.
Yeah.
And that, reading that, I realized that you don't have to write a lot to say a lot. So that was something that, with my writing I do now, Yeah, there are times I'll take something very long form and, flesh it out. At the same time, I'm kind of I favor almost like the Ericksonian school of psychology, where if you can make a very brief, very dramatic impact, you're more likely to change somebody than droning on about it for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Are you big into like NLP or those kind of the Ericksonian side of things, where he was with like Bandler?
I've got some, I've got a lot of Eric's original text, and NLP is kind of an offshoot of some of his therapies that he used. Like NLP, you could reduce it down to like you say it enough times you believe it almost.
Yeah.
That's very reductionist, but let's go with that. But the thing with NLP is that if you look at it within the broader context of Ericksonian therapy, he favored these brief therapy options, but he was also very precise with how he wanted questions to be asked with people, where you sit them down, and if you want to take them to this mental state, you have to very quickly ascertain where they're at mentally, and then start asking these questions in such a manner as to get them into this position to be influenced.
Yeah.
And that's something, I practice that on Twitter a lot with tweets, where if you actually go through, like, I'm going to timeline tweets and read them, there are certain points I make where I set up the person to read the first tweet, read the second tweet, ask the question, and then I answer it. And whether they realize it or not, that positions me as the expert in their mind. Since I didn't tell them, obviously, with the first time, like, I want you to really think highly of me, here's how I'm going to do it. But I speak, or tweet in such a way that if you read enough the timeline and, you follow me, over time, you're going to come to think that I know what I'm talking about, which I'd like to think that I do. But the style of tweeting, the questions and the way they're phrased, that's not random. That is intentional.
Well, what was an example of that? Just what was a question where someone asked something?
Yeah. So easy example. Let's say like I'm talking to a client for the first time. And so I know with client, I want to assess their need state. So, I want to find out everything I can about them. So like the opening for that was, this is as simple as hell, but it works. Hey, I'm Alexander. How are you feeling today? And then they'll ask the question, is that how you're, and then I'll just, it's brief, it's offhand, the delivery matters. I'm like, okay. I'm like, so is that how you're really feeling though? And just asking that alone, it's simple. Because that's the thing, it's really fucking simple. Yeah, and people you're like, what the fuck's that going to do?
Yeah.
I ask you how you're feeling offhand. Hey, Aaron, what's up? How you feeling? That's casual. If I ask you, hey man, what's up? How you feeling? And you answer the question, but I'm like, well, dude, but how are you really feeling today? One, you're going to laugh.
Yeah.
Because again, you're just natural reaction. Oh, it was like a real question. Two, the sheer novelty of it makes you're going to want to share something, or if you don't want to share, you're going to be perceptive to the idea of like, oh, he's going to, he asked me like an actual question about myself. People, whether they agree or not, everybody likes to talk about them. Their own, everyone likes to talk about themselves. So based on your reaction, I can lead off of that in whatever direction I want. If someone's, if they start talking about, their physical state, coming in, then I know what their impression is of what they think I'm going to ask them about.
Yeah.
So that could be a whole different. I could be, since people, if I'm the trainer, hey, how are you really feeling? Well, I had this day's been a long day. It could be, if you go off on a tangent about their day, I already know if their lifestyle is going to be the thing to hit upon if I want to persuade them. It could be immediately talking about exercise. So I know they probably have some frustrations with either, their past history or people they worked with that, they want to have addressed in some way. Yeah, it could go, I've had to go into the medical side where I've had this and I've had this and my physician this. And, if someone goes off on a tangent, I'm like, they don't really listen to you, do you? No, they don't listen to me. So I'm there just gauging, how they're responding.
Yeah, pulling them out of that state, kind of.
Yeah, and then eventually I get them to a persuasionary point where, when they go into the office or they go to, sign the contract or what are we going to do about this, they want me to work with them, and the sale in that sense is made.
Yeah.
Everything sales in that regard. Not speaking just monetarily, but you always have to be selling yourself in some fashion to people.
It's probably the most underappreciated aspect, or actually non-mentioned aspect, as far as the modern education system is. Not just the fact that people are being trained to be purely employer or employees, but that there's no impetus on sales and how everything really is sales. You know, life is, when you're engaging with people, it's an aspect of sales. So
Yeah.
no one teaches you that. You got to really hammer it in. So one last thing, what would you tell yourself 10 years ago if you had to go back in time?
I wouldn't tell myself anything.
Just roll the dice.
Yeah, I honestly, it sounds like if I could tell myself one thing, I love time travel and science fiction. You know, relative to life at large, knowing my personality, I tell myself to go fuck myself. So there's nothing I could have said to me then that I would really have listened to.
I think that might be perfect, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I could make up and be like, well, you know, if I could sit myself down and really speak in this manner, and like, relative to my mental state and where I was at 10 years ago, shit show. So
Yeah.
there's nothing to say in that regard.
So what's coming up on the horizon? How can people find out more about you? Sign up for the email. You know, find you on Twitter.
Yeah, so coming up the horizon right now. So I'll be writing for Danger and Play regularly. That's sort of like the fitness, you know, covering the fitness beat. You can find my stuff on Tier Revolution. A lot of that's anti-aging. That's very training focused. A lot of it. So I mean, that gets really heavy into like sort of the science and application of how to train, how to lift, how to ensure, you know, your joints are healthy, how to effectively build muscle. That's on Tier Revolution. My own email list is just on my website, alexander1antoniocortez.com, one word. I send out 3 emails a day. If you don't like being emailed a lot, don't sign up for it. The complaints about that crack me up, since I always tell everybody.
You want those unsubscribes, right?
Yeah, but yeah, that's just, you can subscribe 3 emails a day. That covers pretty much everything about health. I send out a compendium of all those emails to everybody at the end of the month. So is there anything that you missed or you didn't catch it, you'll always get it. And then at the end of every month, a new book comes out that's covering a different aspect of health. So the one at the end of this month is going to be about stress and stress management and the effects on body composition. And that'll be, they're pretty hard hitting, you know, 60 pages long. This covers everything in regards to how cortisol affects you, how lifestyle affects you, what stress does internally, and then how you go about changing that in your day-to-day life, along with like the necessary information about how body composition works, body weight, what have you. That'll come out the last week of this month.
Awesome. Yeah, man, that was a great deep dive. I appreciate it. And
No problem.
I'd love to, let's have you back on and go a little deeper, you know? I want to get more into some of the hormone optimization stuff and some of the supplements. But guys, find Alexander at AJA_CORTES on Twitter. Awesome. Just follow the guys. He knows his stuff. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Aaron.